Hi, I'm Steve Kep, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring why we need a Marshall Plan for moms. It's not just a topic, but it's a campaign that's in the news, including an open letter this week from 50 female celebrities, business leaders, and activists who asked President Biden to bolster his COVID-19 pandemic plan to pay mothers for the work they do and pass policies on parental leave, affordable health care, and pay equity. Why propose such an extraordinary plan? It's because in the current pandemic and economic crisis, moms have hit a breaking point. The numbers are startling. You may have seen data in a new Fortune magazine story out this morning. Among the points they made, 5.4 million women have lost their jobs since last February. As of September, there were 3 working mothers unemployed for every father who had lost a job. Women accounted for the entirety of all 140,000 net jobs the US economy shed in December. Today, the percentage of American women working is the lowest it's been in 32 years. While this is a crisis brought on by the pandemic, it's an old familiar problem too. 43% of women leave their careers within 1 year of having a baby. Why? Moms have been undervalued by society for years and left out of critical policy agendas to drive meaningful change in society. Now, top employers have led the way in filling these gaps, with the best workplaces for parents creating blueprints for businesses to support and retain moms in the workforce. But there needs to be more, which is the purpose of the campaign calling for a Marshall Plan for moms. It's a reference to the 1948 federal government program that spent billions of dollars to help rebuild Europe after World War II. As policymakers set their agendas in Washington, we'll hear today from 2 female founder CEOs and mothers, Reshma Saujani, founder and CEO of Girls Who Code, and Kate Ryder, founder and CEO of Maven Clinic, as they make the business case for supporting moms once and for all. Before we dive into this topic, we'd like to thank our partners at Maven, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. Maven is the world's largest virtual clinic for women's and family health. Its unique end-to-end care model across fertility, maternity, and parenting helps employers attract and retain diverse talent, support the overall well-being of their workforce, and lower fertility and maternity-related healthcare costs. Maven has been recognized as Fast Company's #1 most innovative health company. It's supported over 5 million women and families since its founding in 2014, and partners with clients such as AT&T, Boston Scientific, and Snap. You can learn more at mavenclinic.com or by following Maven on LinkedIn or Instagram. Now, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event. So you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for the session from the Society of Human Resource Management and Human Resource Certification Institute. And look out for a written account of this conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. About 45 minutes into this conversation, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, business journalist Lydia Dishman, who reports and edits for Fast Company on tech and leadership, and has written for CBS, Money Watch, Fortune, and the New York Times, among others. Okay, Lydia, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. As Steve said, I am Lydia Dishman. I am a contributing editor with Fast Company, but more importantly, I am also a mom of 2 wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous, smart daughters. So just wanted to add a plug for them today. And you know, we've heard these stats and they are staggering, but I did want to add a few of my own that I've found from a labor economic standpoint. The situation is dangerous because since 1988, the number of children living in breadwinner moms' households has risen by 47%. And the number of breadwinner moms has risen by 33%. Moms have increased their contributions to family income by 7.5 points. And today, more than 70% of US households with children depend on moms for their economic well-being. And another stat that you may not be familiar with is a recent one from the Council of Contemporary Families report. Chronic household stress, and certainly we've all been under plenty of stress since the pandemic began, associated with economic scarcity and insecurity has been shown to pose long-term risks to children, including deficits in cognitive and behavioral functioning and mental and physical health that extend well into adulthood. So the implications and impact cut across sectors and socioeconomic lines. And we can safely say that everyone is affected and anyone can gain from changing the status quo. So to discuss how we're going to go about this, because we are going to solve the world's problems this afternoon, we have Reshma and Kate. And I'd like to begin the conversation by asking each of them to briefly introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their work, and most importantly, how the pandemic has impacted their work and life over the past 10 months. That's going to be a mouthful. But Kate, let's start with you. You're still on mute.
Okay, great. Well, so thrilled to be here with both of you, and thank you so much for this conversation and featuring this today. So, I'm Kate. I founded Maven in 2014, and really the idea, we're a women's and family health platform supporting all the different pathways to parenthood, from fertility through maternity and into parenting. But really, where we started in 2015 was really diving into that critical moment where women are returning to work after having kids. And so that was one of the first programs we launched, was our kind of pregnancy, postpartum, and return to work program, to start to tackle some of these of these issues around women's representation in the workforce through family benefits. So today, we're so thrilled to have raised about 90 million. We're about almost 200 people in New York, and really continuing to kind of, build our clinical programs in partnership with employers and health plans to get great care and support into the hands of families, so that they can, really deal with this rush hour of life right now, where you're ramping your career as you're having kids and raising families. How parenting I have two kids. So I have a 4-year-old son, Theo, a 2-year-old daughter, Esme, and I am pregnant with my third. So I just got back from a prenatal visit like 45 minutes ago. I think that the silver lining of the pandemic, of course, is that we all are seeing our families a lot. But of course, I think personally for me, I know so many of my friends, so many of our Maven teammates, being a caregiver is really exhausting. And so I think it's that, that balance. You have some really good days, you have some really tiring days. And so really, it's made us, particularly as our product team, really thoughtful about, what can we be launching now to really get at some of this burnout, and particularly now around this issue of, the numbers and the data are here around how mothers are just so disproportionately impacted right now from a caregiving perspective, not just in the workforce, but across particularly, more vulnerable populations that have been pushed out of the workforce. How do we really tackle that through better healthcare services? So that's through the lens through which we're trying to kind of affect change and do our part.
I like the way you said some days are good days and some days are bad days. Sometimes I feel like some minutes are good minutes and other minutes are not so good. Reshma?
Thank you, Lydia. And hi, Kate. So great to be here. Welcome to my son's bedroom, the best Zoom retail space in my house. Hi, I'm Reshma. I am the CEO and founder of Girls Who Code. I'm the author of a book, Brave Not Perfect. And I guess I'm the author of the Marshall Plan for Moms. I spend my days, nights, almost the past decade, trying to create and inspire the next generation of girls to be coders and innovators, quite frankly, the next Kate Ryders. We are living in a world where less than 20% of those in the technology workforce are women, and less than 0.4% of girls aspire to be in a STEM career. And so about 10 years ago, we said, let's change that, because all I kept hearing was that it was a pipeline problem, and that if we found more women and girls, we wanted to hire them. So I said, great, let's go build that pipeline. And 10 years later, almost, we have taught over 300,000 girls to code. We have 10,000 Girls Who Code clubs across the country. When we started Girls Who Code, almost 18% of computer science graduates were women, and now in some schools, it's almost as high as 50%. So it's no longer a pipeline problem. So the work that we're really focused on is really, rooting out bias, sexual discrimination, racial discrimination, to make sure that tech companies actually, hire these amazing women. And if we're ever going to solve climate, if we're going to solve COVID, if we're going to solve cancer, like we need women sitting around the table. Um, I started really getting passionate about this particular issue this year. I have a 5-year-old, almost 6 in a week, and a 1-year-old. And my son Sai was born January 25th, and this was the year that I was going to get maternity leave. Like my company was in a great place, right? I was going to, finally get to, as you can appreciate, Kate, like I live on planes and trains before COVID happened, and I probably saw my kids an hour a day. But this was going to be the time where it was different. And 6 weeks later, we were in the middle of a global health crisis. My nonprofit, my baby, was at risk. And I had to get to work every day, 20 hours a day, while I was trying to take care of a newborn and homeschool, a soon to be kindergartner. And I was literally losing my mind because I turned into nanny, cook, tech support, cleaner, mental health counselor, everything all in a day. And I was barely keeping it together. And I think I reached my breaking point when my son goes to public school in New York City when they closed the schools down again. And what I realized at that moment, that so many women in my life, the women who work with me at Girls Who Code, the women who I are part of my sisterhood, school closures really affected everything about the way that we lived and worked. Because, and the thing was that I realized was that no one asked me. No one said, hey, can you log your kid on to Zoom 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock? Does that work for your schedule? And the reality, nobody asked any of us. And so, women are leaving the workforce, not because we don't want to work, but because of childcare. And because our companies that we work at oftentimes don't respond with the flexibility that we need. And so I, out of anger and frustration and desperation, wrote an op-ed calling for the Biden administration to put together a Marshall Plan for moms. And it resonated with millions of women who said, I feel seen. And so now we're going to get it done because that's what we do as moms, right? The fabric of our society is based upon motherhood. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with y'all today to really talk about what we can do because, as we build America back better, we have an opportunity to build motherhood back better. And I think we should take full advantage of that.
100%. I'm with you. My kids are older now, and I can remember back in the day, actually not really telling too many people that I even had kids because moms in the workplace were looked down on. Everyone just assumed that you were going to be flying off dealing with, something or another, and that you couldn't get your work done. And I am thinking that the silver lining to the pandemic is to show exactly how much women can get done in addition to their work. And, productivity has gone up alongside of all these things, even though many of us have lost many hairs and, gone gray and all of that. But, as you said, Reshma and Kate, your stories resonated and they're not isolated. And I know that the study that Maven and Great Place to Work did indicated that many others are facing similar challenges. So let's start with the data. What does it say that moms want? Kate?
Yeah, I think, kind of echoing what Reshma said is that no one ever has asked that question, right? And when you really unpack that, I think that what moms are looking for is, let's take apart all of the bias, I think, that is baked into a lot of our systems, but it's actually flexibility in a real way. And also in a way that, if a lot of moms already are facing bias in the workplace as moms, that flexibility is really kind of ironclad and laid out around how you do it, what a company's policy is. Because I think what we don't want is, given that we've seen so many women, over 5 million leave the workforce over the last 9 months, what we really don't want is like, how do you stem that? And how do you really support the moms that are still here? And with these kind of flexible policies, because at the end of the day, moms are going to pick their children over their job. If their children are suffering, if their children need, have greater needs for education right now, because which they're not getting at school. And so how do you support the moms who, will always make that choice, which I think almost all moms will make that choice. And so that's number one. And number two, for the moms that have left the workforce, but then want to come back, how do you create returnships in a really profound and pronounced way? That again, you can't leave a lot of this up to chance. You have to be super thoughtful about what the rules are, because there is such bias already baked into a lot of our organizations, that you have to be really, really clear on how it all works, be super thoughtful, ask moms, each company is different based on the type of workforce that they have. A tech workforce is gonna be really different than a retail workforce who has to actually go show up every single day. So it's really, I think, companies being super thoughtful about what flexibility means for their organization, and how to really make it a leadership level and board level imperative to, maintain gender equity in the workforce going forward, and strategies to, if a company's lost a lot of women, strategies to bring it back.
Yeah.
Reshma, your op-ed really resonated. So I'm just wondering if you had any personal anecdotes that were shared with you
Yeah.
about what moms need.
Yeah, I think the thing that's so scary is how quickly we lost so many gains. The fact that we're at labor participation where we were at in 1980s, like that happened in 9 months. Like that should frighten all of us. And so, when I talked about the Marshall Plan for Moms, I think for us that includes, basic income for moms. You do not value what you do not pay for. And again, in my city, in New York City, as you think about, they're still talking about keeping the schools closed in the fall. Can you believe that? And so as you're thinking about a reopening plan and you're figuring out the cost of keeping teachers safe and HVAC equipment, I want you to calculate the cost of lost labor. Factor that in. And I think until you really start putting a value on our unseen, unpaid, labor, nothing changes. The second thing is we need to pass policies like affordable daycare and paid leave. There are some good ideas that are in Biden's plan right now in terms of bailing out the daycare industry and making sure that low income mothers in particular get a tax credit to pay for childcare. But it can't just be a 1-year stopgap. We need real structural change. The third thing is look, schools have to be open 5 days a week, period. Like if we don't open up schools 5 days a week safely, then we're going to be in the 1960s in like a couple of months. Again, it's going to happen really fast. And so we know that is potentially a concern and a reality. So we should be working on, again, what do we need to do in terms of batch testing, keeping teachers safe, social distancing in the schools, and lastly, I think this point is like that Kate raised is this idea of like, what are we doing to bring women back? Because we know that many of the jobs were lost because the vast majority of those working in retail and healthcare and education are women and women of color. And a lot of those jobs, they're not coming back. So how do we retrain women for the jobs of tomorrow? And then for women who have left and want to come back, the other reason that they left is, childcare was one. The second one was because their companies weren't offering flexibility. Lydia, I was laughing as you were talking because I feel like when I think about just what I did before 2:00 today, I'm like, damn, you know what I mean? Like, put me in charge of anything, right? Like, and when I just think about my day, I am generally like feeding my baby while I'm asking a company for $1 million and like have, laundry in the background. And I am just doing it, and I look at my husband, God bless him, I love him. But like, if he's on a Zoom call, he'll be like, get away. I'm trying to be professional. Like he can't handle it in the same way that I can. And I see the same thing with all the women I work for. I'm just like, more women, but I wonder, right? Because now everybody knows our truth. You can't hide your kids anymore. They know, they know what my son's bedroom looks like. They know, like they've heard me fight with my husband 100 times. They know, they know everything about you. And we were already facing a motherhood penalty and a fatherhood premium in the workplace. I think the penalty is going to be even greater when we go back. Unless we do something about it. And as Kate said, we're very intentional about rooting out, I think, the deepened bias that we have towards motherhood, that has also, I think, been exacerbated by this pandemic. Because now you really see our roles as doing all the unseen, unpaid work. And and so I really think that we have to be really, really thoughtful about that, in addition to like really developing flexibility programs. And I do think that the government can really be incentivizing the private sector to do that. And that's a pressure that we need to put on people and hold them accountable.
This notion of flexibility, though, while, theoretically I'm 100% behind it, one of my colleagues recently penned a piece that said flexibility wasn't going to be enough for moms. And when I started thinking about that, I kind of was getting the feeling like, you know, there is this talk about flexibility, and what it's equating to is, thoughts and prayers. And it's definitely a good strategy. But when we're talking about it from a leadership level, what does that look like? What does it look like to offer flexibility that's sustainable? Or really just even to get buy-in for flexibility? What's a good way to make that happen in an organization? And this question is for both of you. So who wants to jump in on that one first?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. Sorry, the crying child in the background. You hear that? I can. So we have a wonderful client advisory board with some Fortune 50 companies on that on the board, and so this actually came up in a big way in the fall when it was very clear that a lot of schools weren't reopening and there was this crisis, and and then we know what happened with the numbers, right? All of the women dropping out of the workforce. And so one of the best ways that I think a lot of the leading companies were doing it was actually telling people that they could keep full benefits, so full healthcare benefits, which are really expensive, and but that they could work part-time. And so they could work on a reduced schedule. And so all of a sudden, when you're doing that, you're basically saying, if like, we're going to totally support you. And if you go down to, 25, 30 hours a week and you work with your managers on that, then, there's no penalty. We're in a pandemic. And just being really, really clear about what those rules are to then allow people to, to take that. And so, again, it was very, it's always, this is a very charged issue. So, and I know that there was a lot of backlash in the fall around doing too much for caregivers, a lot of more women, but I think that a lot of great companies have been really intentional about it. I do think there's another layer though, where you really have to get in at a manager level and train managers for how to actually work with their teams and assign kind of support on how to pick up some of that work if somebody goes on part-time. And so I think like one of the things I think we saw happen was there's a lot of good intention on setting, these flexibility policies, but then maybe at some of the manager levels, you then a lot of the employees were at the whim of the manager, and how was the manager adapting to that? What tools did they have? Were they, versus others that might not have known, we're not handling that as well. And so I think that's one area that we see a lot of our employer clients, and we just hear about a lot around how to, how to really codify flexibility, not just from a rules standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint, allowing employees to not have meetings like for like certain days of the week so that they can have a more flexible schedule, those days. Like, so, and so anyway, so that's one of the things that we're seeing a lot of. Then I think the other thing is just benefits. I mean, it's the industry that we work in, but, tons of childcare benefits came online, particularly in the fall, which is great to see. Lots of caregiving leave, lots of, a lot of things to support. And so, but what I love about what Reshma is kind of really spearheading is, I think that we also, it's not just about caregiving, but we need to call out moms and motherhood really, really specifically, because when you look at who this is and who are these people, a lot of it disproportionately is our moms. And so how do you even be more thoughtful about this group and tackling this big issue, given that the moms already have been facing a lot of bias?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the cultural thing, and Reshma, I'd like you to speak to this as well. I mean, obviously, you're in charge of an organization, so you can set the tone and the culture. But
Yeah.
how would you advise someone to do that in a very intentional way as well, in order for it to trickle down?
Look, I have to be honest, I too struggled with it as a CEO. My entire M team is women with young children. And as we were anxiously waiting to see, because in the summer, we weren't sure if schools were going to open. They were still saying that they were going to open. And so we were offering, obviously a ton of flexibility, but we also had a bunch of KPIs and goals to meet and money to raise and programs to launch. And I just saw like my senior leaders just burning it at two ends. And it was really just almost watching like a mental health crisis unfold in my own life and in the lives of the women I work. And so some ways like flexibility was bad, right? Because we are a bunch of ambitious type A women. Like that means that we're going to get up at 4 and then do what we need to do. And then there was no breaks and there was no real time for yourself. And so I think that it's hard to think about flexibility without thinking about the structural changes that we have to make. Right. When I think about like, I had flexibility before COVID happened as a CEO, and flexibility meant like I could go to my son's music class or pick him up from school. Like it was almost being able to enjoy my children and being a mother and being a CEO, but not one or the other. And so it's really, really, really important, I think, to think about how you do it in a way that doesn't just put more on women. And maybe that's redefined. I don't have the answer. Look, I think this is really hard. I don't know if it's redefining productivity, like redefining, back in the day, and I'm aging myself, but like FaceTime was huge, and it doesn't seem to really, it shouldn't matter anymore. So I think it's like we have to really think about it. I do love Kate's call out. When I launched the Marshall Plan for Moms, everyone's like, well, some people are like, well, why don't you call it Marshall Plan for Parents? What about the dads? What about but the reality is like, you cannot change what you cannot name. It's the same reason why I started Girls Who Code, even though yes, boys should learn how to code too, but we have a gender problem. And mothers have been unduly burdened by the pandemic more than anybody else. And that's just the fact. And that's okay, because when we uplift mothers, we uplift everybody. And you can't really solve a problem that you cannot name. You can't have a one size fits all problem because it's so complicated. I mean, Kate started this conversation by saying, if a mom is asked to choose between her children and her work, she will choose her child. And so we cannot set up a structure where you can't have a job or a child, or you have to have one or the other. You can't have both. And that's essentially what we're telling people right now. And for the vast majority of women who actually can't choose, because that's the other false dichotomy. It's like we live in a society where, women have to work for a paycheck to put food on the table. And this crisis is forcing women on food stamps or taking the night shift or working 3 jobs. And like, it is a crisis that's unfolding, and we don't have very many choices in it. So a lot of this is about structural change.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the point about the what about the dads, and there has been some talk among people saying contentious, like what about the non-parents, people who don't have kids at all, are they going to be shorted by these potential policies? If moms get flexibility, I'm not going to get flexibility, I have to pick up the slack. But actually, Maven and Great Places to Work data suggests, and I'm going to call this out now, 93% of working men without children, and the same amount, 93% of working women without children who work for a company that invests in its working parent population, say theirs is a great place to work. So that would indicate that people are on board regardless of their status as parents or not. But what I was thinking about, though, when you're talking about a cultural shift, is that yes, it has to start from the top. Yes, it has to be very intentional. But what can, let's say, HR, who all these HR people in the audience, you have definitely proven yourselves to be the MVPs of 2020. So let's give them something else to do. But what policies might they be able to champion and help put in place to make this change happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from a policy standpoint, it's really about knowing your data in terms of like who are the groups that need the most support, and then laying out a roadmap to say, okay, this is what we're tackling first, this is what we're tackling second. Like, for instance, in the same report that we did, 96% of employers are prioritizing mental health right now because of all the burnout and the stress. And so, I think it's just being on top of the data, but I do want to make a point around, really helping groups, because we see this sometimes, when you're working in the benefits industry, you have an HR, and I feel like I, as a CEO, and probably Reshma, like we're like heads of HR too, right? And so I think, you want to make sure you hear everyone. You want to make sure that you're creating a workplace where everybody can bring their whole selves to work. But the whole point of diversity and inclusion and building diverse and equitable and inclusive workplaces is not about obliterating difference and pretending that it doesn't exist. It's about celebrating it. And so given all of the labor economics data, and given that, I just know that when my husband at night is, hanging with his friends, they're talking about sports and playing poker, and I'm on the phone, Zoom calls with my best friends, being like, oh my God, what was your day like today? And it's about it's about the kids, it's about juggling the family, and it's just different. And I know that, of course, there are, same-sex couples that are, that aren't women, that are talking about the same things, but and that's great too. But it's just really important to call out that to be diverse and inclusive, to allow people to bring their whole selves to work, mothers are really struggling right now, and it's okay to say that. And then really for the benefits leaders to just be on top of all of that data, to do constant surveys, to ask people what they want. And then, there are so many, just being in the digital health industry, there are so many different startups tackling every part of well-being right now in startups. And so in employee benefits. And so I think that there are a lot of really interesting solutions that you can bring to fore based on what you identify as your big needs.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful because, before COVID, there was really a push, I think, for many companies to start actually getting away from affinity groups, right? There was a reluctance to even have women's affinity groups. And so I think that like that is almost, to your point, Kate, like not allowing us to solve the problem in front of us, and like, again, creating, the need to be specific about who is suffering, what are they struggling with, and why is the only way that we can actually come up with a solution that's going to work. And so, when we go back to this, naming it that how do we help mothers at our workplace? What are the things that they need is, I think, the first way that you actually solve the problem, by being specific and by being intentional. We're really encouraging people to start Marshall Plan for Mom task force at work, right? So really getting the data. How many mothers have left? Why have they left? What are the needs that they have? Is it about childcare? Is it about an aging parent? What is it about? What would it take for them to actually come back to work? What do they need? I also think this point about the motherhood penalty is going to be huge. We already know so many women, I'm sure, are asked, hey, are you planning on having another kid? How young are your kids? What's your childcare situation at home, right? Already trying to assume that because we have kids, we're suddenly not as interested in our careers. Again, now they know our life. And so that is simply going to be exacerbated. So in the same way that we've been doing a ton of unconscious bias training and really trying to root out, some of the inherent biases that we have, we're going to have to do the same when it comes to the motherhood penalty, because we are going to pay a bigger tax, for this post-COVID. And if we're not careful, again, we are really quickly going to get back to where we were in the 1960s before we know it.
I'm glad that you both mentioned the DEI efforts, because one of the strategies is courageous conversations and how to create safe spaces to talk about really difficult topics, and how to encourage people, let's say, not to cover and really bring their whole selves to work. So, for those in the audience who may be an HR department of one or a team lead, what would you say, how would someone go about creating those safe spaces to make mothers feel comfortable to talk about their challenges in a way that, will help them get addressed, but also not be a penalty to them?
Look, if we've ever had a time to change culture, it's now. We just went through a once in a lifetime global pandemic. Like, we have an opportunity to fundamentally change motherhood in this country once and for all. I talk a lot about bravery and perfection. One would think that perfectionism would die in the pandemic, but it is alive and well. And what was happening during this pandemic? Many of us were like, oh shit, should I bake banana bread? Am I supposed to learn how to play the guitar? No, you're simply supposed
Please don't
to
talk
stay
about sourdough.
alive, right? And so we were already getting so much of this pressure. And so what I would say to women, you know what? When your baby's crying or your dog walks in, don't turn off your video. Leave it on, right? If there's chaos happening around you, don't apologize for it. Like, this is your reality. And so like what we have to do when we go back to work is bring our full self with us and ask for exactly what we need. And don't worry if they don't like us. And don't worry if they don't judge us. And we have to do it in terms of being a sisterhood together. We have to have one another's backs. What I find so fascinating is, we would think that there'd be all these COVID babies, but actually, the birth rate has gone down. And I know every young woman who, works for me is looking at me and be like, oh, I don't want that. Right. It's like, we have also at the same time made motherhood incredibly unattractive. In some ways, we have to save it. And in order to save it, we have to redefine it. We have to be honest about it, authentic about it, and we have to ask for what we need. Because I am famous for hiring women like 8, 9 months pregnant. I love mothers, as an entrepreneur, in terms of like, they are the people that I are always the ones I can count on, my hardest workers, right? And so we know that about ourselves because we just don't have time. We just don't have time, right? And so we just get it done. And so I think that that is the lesson. And again, in this pandemic, we just got it done again and stayed alive, hopefully. So like, I think that we have to learn something from that and bring that back, bring that to bear when we get to redefine the new normal.
Yeah, and I think the way that companies can support all of this culture change, which I think is just, how we should be thinking about it, is, on the one hand, like, put your money where your mouth is. So really create those support structures, invest in those benefits, invest in those childcare support systems and subsidies, to really help the mothers. I think, what we do with a lot of our clients is if you start a conversation that is a tough conversation that, where you bring in an external speaker, or we bring in some of our mental health providers, career coaches, to really kind of address head on what people are going through, to really help build empathy in cultures, to help people walk in other people's shoes. So particularly mothers, but not just mothers, everybody in the workforce, right? And so I think that's another key area of just kind of, the pandemic has been rough for everybody, no matter who you are, and how do you get everyone else to walk in each other's shoes, through some of these kind of activities that HR teams can actually drive those conversations. I think that there's, tons of parent ERGs that then have spinoffs of, moms and dads that can be, really supported. So I think there's a lot there. And yeah, I mean, I think we spend so much of our time at work, and that I think really, if HR directors were the heroes of 2020, and our VP of people, the amount of stuff he's had to deal with, it's just insane. And his whole team. But ultimately now they really have an opportunity to be the white knights of really helping drive to shape this. And, one thing that was so interesting is, we were part of this roundtable with a lot of different companies. There's this one big retail company, I'm sure we all wear the clothing. And the HR director said, I never was part of the conversation before, and I never really had a seat at the table. And now people are listening to me. And I think that also, you know, that's really exciting. And hopefully that too will, you know, help going forward, because then as long as HR has a seat at the table and they're data driven and they're listening and they're, you know, talking to their employees, you know, they're the ones that are thinking about these really imperfect systems of humans that, that are, you know, our companies, and how to make things better. And so I think it's really important that they also just have a seat at the table to change this all going forward.
In a much larger sense here, you know, we're talking about the corporate side of things, but, you know, in terms of economic impact, how does this make the case for supporting mothers through legislation? Reshma?
How does what make the case? I mean, like, how does the situation that we're in make the case? Yeah, I mean, look, as you were talking, it was, we still are a country that doesn't have paid leave. You know, we don't have affordable daycare. You know, the most controversial part of like what I'm talking about is paying, you know, mothers for their, you know, unpaid labor. They do that in a lot of countries. So like we are actually far behind, and we always have been, and that's why we don't have, you know, the type of representation we should see in Main Street, Wall Street, and Congress. And so I think we, again, in this broken structure, you know, in this broken moment of motherhood, we have an opportunity to rebuild and to be the leader, and to be the shining star. Because what we're talking about right now, what we're experiencing, mothers across the globe are experiencing the exact same thing. So it is an enormous opportunity for us to organize, galvanize, and to like rethink about this. You know, I was looking at some of the questions in the chat, and yeah, I do think that companies should potentially pay for childcare. Why not? You know, for a long time, for our Girls of Code, you know, we started paying for paternal leave before, you know, New York State did. And then, you know, now we supplement it. And so we have a very generous plan. We should be doing the same thing on childcare. So how do we actually think out of the box, you know, and think about this differently? And what is the opportunity and the potential when we do? So look, this is also why I'm so excited that, you know, Kamala Harris is our vice president. You know, she grew up with a single mom. She is a mom. You know, Joe Biden is one of the most compassionate, decent men I have ever met. You know, so if there's ever been an opportunity for us to get this done, it's now. And we shouldn't squander a minute.
Kate, do you want to add anything to that?
Oop, sorry. Yeah. I can, yeah. And I think, you know, I'm just going to add the healthcare lens. I feel like I bring that to conversation, but there's a lot of great maternal health legislation actually right now in Congress. And so really where we focus at Maven is how do you really make that healthcare moment when, you know, when babies are born and, you know, mothers are made mothers, how do you really support? And so I think, you know, today, 50% of about 50% of births are in the Medicaid population, where, you know, 43% of children in this country are on Medicaid, which is the lower Medicaid is the, you know, for lower income Americans. It's the healthcare plan through the government. And so right now, a lot of that healthcare coverage stops at 60 days afterwards, that after a baby's born. And so I think that from a legislative standpoint, one of the things that we look at the most is how do you actually bring better maternal health coverage through that first year of life? I mean, honestly, hopefully beyond too, and really actually support mothers when they become mothers as their children are in those early years, because that drives better health equity. It drives better kind of systemic outcomes. You know, it's going to drive hopefully a lot of the help around the mental health issues right now that parents and that kids are all feeling. But I think, yeah, from a legislative standpoint, there's a lot to start with that in healthcare that we can do around maternal health as well.
Well, we are just about ready to do our audience Q&A. So when we have some good ones too, I really like this one. One of our attendees asks, where does the pandemic leave the whole concept of leaning into a career? Not one of my personal favorite phrases, but anyway, they ask, is there a way to reformulate that idea to put the burden on employers to make working motherhood actually work?
Yeah, I can try to take that one. So so again, I think we've talked a lot about like the HR leader perspective. But I think one of the most important things to really pay attention with in terms of leaning into a career is managers and manager training, and how that kind of, those direct conversations are being had right now. And so I would encourage everybody who, wants to lean in but might not be able to because of, so many demands, to just really have those very direct conversations with managers and peers. And I think that that is so critical. And then from a top down perspective, really training managers on how to help their employees have these who are in these situations where they want to lean in but can't, really then help the managers help them. And then again, at the systemic level, that codifying that flexibility so that people have that opportunity to, if they need to step out through caregiving leave full time for a little bit, or they just need a part-time, situation so they can get through virtual schooling, that's all codified to work.
Reshma, did you want to add something to that? You don't have to. I'm just.
No, I just, it's, when the pandemic started, I felt like I was just grinning and bearing it. And now I'm at my breaking point. So like, I'm not leaning into shit. Like, I'm not. And I don't think that anyone should feel any pressure to do that, because it's like every day I just am grateful that I make it through the day. And I think most moms probably feel how I feel. So I think if there's anything that we need to put intentionality towards, it's towards uh, putting pressure on our elected officials, on our employers, on one another, to change the system, so that we can get to a place, right, where we can um, think about what our greatest potential is and pursue that. But now it's I always say, like, you can't be brave if you're tired, and we're so exhausted, and it's really hard to really think about, what do I want to do next, or do I want to write a book, or do I want to quit my job, and like, there's no mind share for that. And there shouldn't be, because like, we're being asked for too much. And I think, again, it's like most moms I know are at their breaking point. I certainly am.
Well, that leads into a question from Emily, asking, how have you as working moms worked to find the right balance between work and family commitments? So I think she wants to know a little bit more of the nitty gritty of how you're making it work, juggling everything.
Yeah, I mean, not gracefully is like the headline of that answer, but I think let's see how to make it work. Well, if I make sure that so I have a nanny during the day, so I'm very lucky I have childcare. Clock. And I actually, because there's no divide anymore between work and family. So I really make sure that I go and like, we like go outside, even if we just like are stepping on the street for like a hot second with my kids at the end of the day. And it's freezing right now in New York City. So it kind of like wakes me up too and puts me in a different place. And I really make sure that just for like an hour and a half, that I'm reading children's books, I'm playing with them, I'm like getting out of work, I'm totally engaged, even if I'm exhausted. There's way more TV in my house than there's ever been, and that's fine. My son was watching TV right now during this call because his nanny's picking up his sister from preschool. And so anyways, so I think it's like giving yourself permission, like, nothing is perfect, but I think it's those, and even if I'm really tired during that like hour and a half at the end of the day, to be just really intentional about that time where I'm like with my kids, I'm in their world, like my phone, I have no idea where my phone is. That really helps my mental health and balance, because pandemic, no pandemic, it's the most beautiful thing when you're just kind of playing with your kids as their mom, and they could be misbehaving and like, I could be yelling at them, but anyways. And so I think carving out that time. I also think, I mean, I'm pregnant, but before I got pregnant, drinking is really important. And then I'm a massive extrovert. So I need that connection with my friends all the time. So, we have a text message chain called Nasty Mamas. And we just text, and it's a lot of mom stuff. And having that realness, that place to vent, that of just other moms that are going through what you're going through, is also a godsend. And like a lot of times we'll be like, I don't want to get on Zoom. Like, let's just text, and that's fine. But yeah, and so it's not graceful, but there are a few things I make sure I do every day. One of which is like that hour at the end of the day where we step outside, we come back in, and we just play for an hour. And that's really helped a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely +1 to girls' night. I'm so happy that New York City still has outdoor dining, because I go and have a girls' dinner every week, put my Uniqlo on. I don't care if it's like 15 degrees, but like I just need that time, out of the house with some sense of normalcy. I also think it's really important for me to start my day and do something for me. So at least I feel like I wanted something. And so every day I try to work out, even if it's a 20-minute fitting room class, or it's, a Pilates something. And no matter what's happening upstairs, I just, close my ears. I realized though that I wasn't kind of ending my day also with that kind of ritual. So now I bake one chocolate chip cookie in the oven at 375. So it's a little bit gooey, a tiny bit of ice cream, and then I go lock myself in my bedroom. And when my son wants me to make one for him, I say no. And then the last thing, which is, don't judge me, but I think it's really important to not have guilt, and to also just take things off your plate. So I've just stopped doing my son's homework. And like, look, I'm like on the PTA, like I run an girls' education. I probably should help do his homework, but you know what? I don't want to. And I don't have time. And he's 5 and he's going to be fine. So I think that like for those of us who have like, especially like tiger mom potential, and are so worried that our kids are going to be like, completely messed up, screwed up, like drop the ball. If they're watching too much, iPad or Nintendo Switch, or you don't do the science experiment or whatever, it's fine. It's fine. Give yourself permission.
And yeah, and just to echo Reshma, every time I feel guilty for doing this, it's like make sure you're embracing a community of other moms who are like, oh, let me tell you what I did.
It's so true. Right.
So
Ditch the ones that make you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat on this one.
And sometimes it feels like a slow boat indeed. But as I always tell, my kids are older now. And, I said, we set the bar very low in the Dishman household. I just always tell them, just be happy and get off my payroll. This is all I ask of you. So, and on some days that's really good. So, we're going for work-life balance. Daryl has a very interesting question. What is your perspective on driving the discussion on support for work-life integration, not work-life balance? It forces an individual look at needs. What do you think about that?
So I guess work-life integration, I think maybe I'm not totally sure what that means. I don't know. Maybe if you can write a little bit more in the comment section, we can try. I can kind of, there's more work-life integration, obviously, because we're seeing each other's families. We're all working from home. I also know that at least at Maven, we're really missing our community with each other. It's really hard to, we've hired 90 people in the past year that have onboarded remotely. And it's really hard to get to know your colleagues over Zoom, quite frankly. And, even for our remote workforce that before COVID, like they were still coming into the office and, going out for dinners and building those in-person moments. And so I think, we're planning on definitely having an in-person culture, but I think that after we can go back safely, but I think, this idea of probably not 5 days. Well, I don't think we really ever were 5 days a week, but really kind of, expecting, like, everybody has been super productive throughout this work from home, and just kind of, again, listening to employees, listening to what they need, and trusting them, and knowing that actually, if the last year has been proof, like, we can achieve anything as a team as long as we're listening to each other, and we have clear goals as a company and whatnot. So I don't know if that answers your question on work-life integration, but that's kind of how we're thinking about how things might change between in-person office life and home life going forward.
Yeah. And honestly, it depends. Like for me, as we're talking, like my baby's crying, the dog's scratching at the door. Like I'm, it's overstimulation. I can't wait to go back to the office. I don't, you know what I mean? I don't want this situation that much longer. But for some people, but I also have a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I live in New York City, and so we don't have a tremendous amount of space. So it's like everyone's situation, quite frankly, is different. And I think the point is that when we do go back to work, to try to figure out how you can build something that accommodates people who have different viewpoints on this.
We've just got a few minutes left. We'll try to get to as many as we can here. As you mentioned, Rhea says, as you mentioned, women of color have been impacted disproportionately by the pandemic. Many have neither the formal education or training to move into more lucrative jobs in tech that lend to working at home and flexibility. How can we address this major issue to move these women forward?
Yeah, that's right. Two times as many Black and Latino women have lost their jobs than white women. 155,000 Black women have lost their jobs. It is a crisis that is disproportionately affecting
And
Black and Latinx.
disproportionately experiencing burnout compared to white women. So it's even those, still at work too.
Yeah, so it's across the board. And I think a lot of the jobs that are not going to be coming back, were jobs that were filled by Black and Latinx women. So we need a wholesale retraining program. Obviously, I spend my life teaching girls to code, and so and half the girls we teach are under the poverty line, half the girls we teach are Black and Latinx. So I think that we do have an opportunity here to teach women skill sets that can get them into the middle class. But again, we have to be really intentional about it. Like I said, I think mothers, women can do anything, and there is so much innovation that we are missing, in our country because we don't have diverse thinkers sitting around the table. So again, like let's go for that. Like let's really set a goal and create intentionality about that. And start retraining women for higher paying jobs. In my family, I'm the daughter of refugees, and my parents came here with nothing. I've had a job since I was 12 years old. And the only reason I'm sitting here is because of economic opportunity, and that people gave me and my parents chances. And so we're not doing that enough for people today.
And
We're
that,
not keeping the American dream alive.
And I think the other thing too is, and I totally agree with all of that on the skills and the retraining. But I think that really big companies, and Maven, we're on that path. But really big companies, I'm talking about the big tech companies, the Facebooks, the Amazons, the Googles, doing more to actually, they have so much money for all their huge internship programs. And so really partnering with the, historically Black colleges at that kind of entry level, so that they can actually help build, pipelines of talent that, right now, I think what we see is, as I think a lot of companies are always trying to, recruit diverse candidates. If you're not creating the pipeline though from the very ground up, then you're just going to get people moving around from companies, but you're not going to get that systemic change. And so I think particularly for really big companies, and some of our clients that we work with, that we see, what's been really great is to see them actually creating, donating and then creating internships and training programs, with some of these organizations.
Okay, in the last few minutes we had a few attendees asking similar questions. If you could support moms in one way tomorrow, what would that be? And, I was thinking about it in terms of a public-private partnership and what that would look like. But if there was just one thing that you can enact tomorrow, what would that be?
I think I know Reshma's answer, the Marshall Plan for Moms.
Thank you.
Me too. No, but I think honestly, I think if there was something as bold as that was ever enacted, that would send such a strong signal. There would be so many cultural conversations. There would be backlash. There would be celebration. But I think that that's a really bold move to really start to address a lot of what the data is actually saying.
Right on. That's right. That's what we need to do.
Well, I'm sure we could spend another 2 hours talking about this, but we might need a cocktail, although Kate, you can't have one. So I'll thank you both so very much for spending the time with me. This has been a great discussion. I love when I don't feel so alone, even though my kids aren't little anymore. You never stop being a mom. So thank you both, and thank you, audience.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you to our speakers, Kate and Reshma. What you said today is part of a really important and urgent public conversation. Thanks again to Maven and to all of you who are participated today. If you'd like to join us at From Day One for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our coming webinars and conferences. Here are a few coming up soon. Thursday, February 4th, we're looking at employee financial resilience. Tuesday, February 9th, 4 Steps to Empowered Managers. And on Wednesday, February 17th, we'll be hosting our half-day conference on creating a culture of purpose amid uncertainty. Thanks, everyone, very much. Stay well.